Page 4 of The Future is in the Past. Since March 9, 1933, until the present day, the United States has been in a state of declared national emergency. The question is, emergency from what? From the Trading with the Enemy Act of October 6, 1917, the War Powers Act was created in March of 1933 and made the American people the enemy of the state, and the act is still valid today. They, the people, are enemies of the government, which they, the people, themselves created. The question is, how can this be? Hi, I'm Fred Satilli. I want to talk right now about the authority for mandates. Our government and governments in many other countries now are taking action that's unlawful and illegal, and they're doing it by mandate, and they seem to think that they have the authority to do this, and they actually do. So we're going to talk about it, and we're going to talk about it in the context of the book, right? The future is in the past, and we're going to start on page 4. On page 4 of the book, it begins to tell this story. The author of this book wanted people to do their own research, and so when I looked at this and I saw the War Powers Act of 1933, I said, well, I need to know more about that, so I began to search. And it turns out the War Powers Act of 1933 is kind of a misnomer, but it is when all this exploded into reality. And so the story starts in 1917. Woodrow Wilson, our favorite president who gave us the Federal Reserve, which, as we know, is not federal and has no reserves. He also enacted the Trading with the Enemies Act. Now, in 1917, this kind of made sense. We just went through World War I, and there was a lot of profiteering during the war, so they wanted to make it where anybody who traded with our enemies during war, the president would have the power to put a stop to that. And being that the war was over, it was kind of an innocuous thing to have this. But we got the Trading with the Enemies Act enacted, and then we went into an incredible boom time, the Roaring '20s. And during this time, the Federal Reserve had just been created. During this time, people were encouraged to put their money in the stock market, and the whole nation did this, and the whole economy was based on the stock market, and they drove up the price of everything and drove up the price of everything, and people consumed like never before. They bought everything. It was a peacetime. It was an industrial time. It went really great. And then in 1929, it was September, they crashed the economy. Now, right now, we have a booming economy, right? The stock market's going wild, and all you hear is that the economy is going to crash and the New World Order is going to put in a whole new financial system. Well, history repeats itself. In 1929, Wall Street crashed. There was tremendous unemployment. There was tremendous desperation around the nation. And why did they do this? Well, they did it for the very simple reason that people who had money, who didn't lose money in the crash, who kept vast wealth not in the market that crashed, would now be able to buy everything in America really on sale, 10 cents on a dollar. Whole towns, whole industries, everything was in financial trouble, and people who had money were able to get huge discounts on absolutely everything. So it was wonderful, and this is how the rich got richer at that time. This is how international banks, money that was offshore in other countries, was all brought in to buy the United States at discount prices. So time went on, and when the crash occurred, people began to withdraw their money from the banks. And they went to the banks, and the banks were closed. They closed Wall Street. They closed the banks. They had to run on the banks, right? People lined up, and they wouldn't let people get their money. This is the threat now, right? We're all afraid we're going to go to the bank one day, and it'll be digitalized, and we won't be able to get our money or whatever. This is now, folks. This is now. It happened before. It's going to happen again. So 1929, the crash wasn't one day. The Wall Street closed. Everybody realized there was a stock market crash, but most people just went to work and continued their thing. But little by little, the unemployment grew, and little by little, the money got tighter, and little by little, all these things happened. And so these international bankers, they wanted to put a clamp on this. And so they gathered together and they financed a guy named Franklin Delano Roosevelt, or Franklin Delano Roosevelt, depending on how you pronounce it. And they worked real hard, and they landslided him in. He won in a huge popular thing, right? That maybe there couldn't have been election fraud back then, could there? But either way, they got this guy in, and in office 5 days, he enacted what patriots call, erroneously, but they do call it the War Powers Act. And what the War Power Act did was it made it illegal to take your money out of the bank, because if everybody took their money out of the bank, the economy would be crashed for sure. So the bankers didn't want anybody taking any money out of the bank, so they made it where the American people were considered enemies of the government, enemies of the state. And this still is in today. The trading, they did this through the Trading with the Enemies Act. They took the Trading of Enemies Act and they put a clause into it called the Emergency Banking Act. That's really what the War Power Act really is. And this gave, where the president had the ability to stop commerce during wartime, right, trading with the enemies, now it gave the president the power to do that during peacetime. And he could declare anybody an enemy, and he declared the entire population of the United States of an enemy, and he restricted their commerce in this way. So this is where they got the power, because they put the country in a state of emergency so that they could control the banking, and it's been in a state of emergency ever since. Now, there's a key to this that's little known, and that is called the rule of necessity. And a good example of a rule of necessity is self-defense. If somebody is attacking you, the axiom or the maxim is the rule of necessity knows no law. In other words, if there is a necessity, all bets are off. You do whatever you want. The rule of necessity knows no law. So right now, we're in a state of emergency, and the president and any number of bureaucrats, governors, health agencies, weird pharmaceutical investors, we're in a state of emergency. We have a necessity. Necessity knows no law. We're going to do whatever we want, any way we want, because it's a state of emergency and we have a necessity. And that gives them the authorities for the mandates. So that's page 4. Get a copy of The Future is in the Past. I guess I should hold it motionless for the camera. And we're going to read past page 4 in the days to come. But this is something right up in front of the book that you need to know all about. 1917, 1929, 1933, Roosevelt, the banksters, how they did all this and why. And this gave them the momentum to continue to do this today. And they're exploiting this as fast and hard as they can. That's the story. Okay, so I hope I've told the story well. I've told it as well as I can. And, get the book, read on, learn more, study each thing, anything you have, questions you have. I learned this story by looking at page 4 and saying, well, what the heck does this mean? And it didn't take me long, a couple of searches here and there, and that's when I found out about the rule of necessity, knowing no law. Interesting, isn't it? Thank you for your time. I'm Fred Satilli. We'll speak again soon.